There are some very noticeable hot topics that are being handled delicately by the Wizards of the Coast.
But not us. We include them in our homebrew campaign world.
It makes for good storytelling.
Buckle up, because it's 5 hot topics that are alive and well in our homebrew campaign world this week on the Dungeon Masters Dojo.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Dungeon Masters Dojo podcast. This is a show for game masters and players alike. We hope to bring you tips and tricks to elevate your game and develop the art of dungeon mastery. I'm your host, Louis Aponte, and these are your Dungeon Masters, Scott Labby and Bill Robotile. Let's enter the dojo and see what they have in store for us today. Good morning, dojo.
Good. Well, you don't normally broadcast or record this early.
We don't.
I'm on my 4th cup of coffee.
I'm tired as well.
It was on the ride here from Shady Pines. They were giving Bill his IV coffee.
Yeah, you think those little hoops are above the seats are for like a handhold? Nope, those are for the IV bags. Well, wait, quick disclaimer. We're going to piss people off.
Yeah, more so than
usual, yeah.
But you know what? Approach this with an open mind.
Kid gloves.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about kid gloves.
Nah, just an open mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're not kid gloves kind of
when
people.
You're listening. Yeah, approach it with an open mind.
Yes.
It's not as bad as you're going to think. And we still have we're still trying to give a bunch of stuff away.
We are trying to give a bunch of stuff away. I tell you what, Scott, why don't you go ahead and tell us about it?
In celebration of 1 year of podcasting, we are holding a giveaway of epic proportions. Everything you need to get started running games. 4 dice trays, 12 complete sets of dice, 4 Crown Royal bags, the D&D Essentials Kit, the D&D Starter Kit, Horde of the Dragon Queen D&D Adventure, the Young Adventurers Collection, Nerdarchy's Out-of-the-Box Encounters, Brass and Steel Steampunk Tabletop RPG, OSR Greats, the Rad Hack, Into the Odd, and White Box Fantastic Medieval Adventure Game. But that's not all. The Curse of Strahd Revamped is included as well. This complete list goes to one lucky winner in the U.S. We realize we may have asked a lot of you initially, so here's the new and improved way to enter the epic giveaway. Simply go to thedungeonmastersdojo.com, our home on the web, and send us a message. You will automatically be entered into the giveaway for a chance to win. After we receive 500 messages, we will draw one lucky winner. We'll see you next time in the dojo.
That is one epic giveaway.
It is, and it is so easy to be entered into it as well. So tell your friends.
By all means.
Got a gaming table? Right before you start, have your friends go to our website, send us an email.
Yep.
And they're entered too. And you could have a chance to fully furnish your entire gaming group.
Here's a mini challenge. If you do have your entire table do it all at once. And we want to see player number 1, player number 2, player number 3, player number 4. So we know how many people are at your table. And we know an entire table did it because we haven't gotten that yet.
And tell us what campaign you're running.
Yeah.
Tell
us. We're running this. Yeah. Little title, campaign, name and player 1, player 2, and then write something. So we know an actual table did it because no one's done that yet. And I think that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, let us know what you're playing at that table. You know, what's the game, but what's your race, your class?
Your genre. Doesn't matter. Let us know. Fill us in.
We got a lot of genres being covered.
Speaking of covering a lot of stuff, shall we delve into it? I'm gonna cue you up. Here's the soapbox. I'm gonna make one statement and let you have at it.
Okay.
Okay. Session 0.
Session 0. Yeah, this is everything we're going to talk about today on this episode should be covered in your Session 0. If you're going to include any of these topics, and honestly, I think you should, and here's why. And I'm going to use an example I rarely use, but Star Trek The Next Generation, their first season was absolute shit. And why was it absolute shit? Because there was no drama. conflict, right? There's no conflict means there's no drama. No drama means boring. So include these things. I encourage you to, because we did like all over the map.
Yeah, literally.
And I think it adds a sense of realism to your world.
Mm-hmm.
It adds conflict. Conflict means drama. Drama means good storytelling.
Right.
And
That equals not boring.
it does. Who wants a boring campaign where everybody gets along, nobody has different opinions on anything? The cultures are all vanilla.
Yeah, and all you do is go out there, beat up a monster, get your experience points, pick up a little loot, and move on to the next one.
Yeah. It's and you know what? Maybe you don't beat up the monster. Maybe you find out that the monster is misunderstood.
There you go.
And you talk out the problems, just like during the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which was a steaming pile of shit.
Do you get the impression that we're going to have to contend with this for quite a bit?
But
He's in one of those moods. Hasn't been one of these moods in a while.
But when they started building conflict into their storylines and drama, and now we had like 6 really good seasons. So that's it. That's
got it out of your system.
Let's
get back to the point.
All right, let's
cover it in your session 0.
Yes.
Right? We say this a lot, and there's a reason why we harp on this. And I think that by this point, after 170-something episodes, we are harping on it. But it is that important, especially when delving into this. There are people at your table that may not want to be included in your scenario if some of these things are prevalent in the storyline. It just may rub them the wrong way, and you got to accept that, and that's fine. If you try to explain how you're going to go about it, and it doesn't become an overall sweeping, this is what everything's about. It is part of the drama. It's part of the story that embellishes. Then hopefully you can address these particular subjects and come to a resolution in your conflict and not piss off any of your players.
It takes a lot of trust on the player's part and their DM to handle these tastefully.
Tastefully,
yeah. And it's tricky. It's more of an art form than a science, handling a distasteful topic tastefully. So let's get right into it,
shall we?
These are some hot topics that are alive and well in our homebrew world, and we did so. We included these because of our group, right? Our gaming group, we think can handle these topics tastefully without being offended.
Well, they're also presented tastefully as well.
That's the key, right? So number 1, slavery, right? When we developed our campaign world, we know that slavery was a big part of history here on this planet.
Yes.
So we based the economies of 2 nations particularly on slavery, on the slave trade.
Well, one of them's slavery, the other one's more indentured servitude. Not much of a distinction depending on which side of the coin you're on.
Yeah. The Prenegenes are slave traders.
Correct.
So are the
Farinasi. Or Serenasi, sorry.
I was thinking Pelerinth.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Big slave trading nations. The Empire of Swords has
that's your indentured servitude, yeah.
Which is slavery by another name.
Yes.
It's a difference between John and Jack.
Mm-hmm.
And we decided that, okay, we're going to start including these things in as a piece of the culture to add different flavors to the culture. Sure, we could have gone in a different direction than slavery, but we did with the rest of the world. How did we handle this tastefully?
I think one of the big things about slavery that seems to go hand in hand, and in a lot of cases should not, is torture.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't include torture in our slavery, at least not overtly.
Right.
It wasn't out there where that's how you handled things. And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems that is associated with slavery is you become a piece of property as opposed to a resource.
Yeah, you're
And
mistreated.
I think in our world, we treat them more like a resource. Now, yes, they're not still treated as people because they are considered a lower class. But it's not something like a piece of furniture where you're just going to go, it's broken, throw it away.
Right.
No, this is a part of the functioning dynamic of this household. And if there's something, if that person's injured, we're going to get them healed. We're going to get them fixed. We're going to get them taken care of because that's a part of the working household. And I think that's how we approached it. Am I wrong?
No, not at all. And one of the other things we used it as a backdrop when there was a part of the adventure, the campaign that took place in that particular part of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a backdrop with not a lot of detail put into it.
Right. It was something that happens there, but it wasn't like the forefront. The forefront was a city. A city functions like any other city. And the underlying tone of the workforce was revolved around slavery. It wasn't one of those where you have these massive corrals of people and, some of the other, people say, it's going to be like Planet of the Apes type deal. There's a corral full of humans and we're going to, just sell them off one by one. That's not the way it was handled. It was more, everything was done more personable.
And I think too, when the topic was at the forefront, it was usually related to a piece of the adventure, a scenario that was part of the larger component where there was party was railing against that practice.
Well, that, and they also came across the small group that was rebelling and have removed themselves one way or another from and it wasn't that they're a runaway slave, we need to seek them out. It's like they no longer wish to do that. Well, we're not going to provide them any resources, but hey, if that's what they want to do, then go ahead. That's what they want to do. But you can't live in the city. Go figure something out. And they weren't persecuted because they were removed from the position that they were at. And I think that's a lot too, is there wasn't the persecution there, the run them down, they're escaped type deal.
Yeah.
There wasn't the torture, and a lot of those are the two big atrocities that go along with this.
Yeah, those really touchy.
Yes.
I mean, the whole topic itself.
The whole topic, the topic within the topic. And like I said, it became a subplot as opposed to the plot.
Yes.
So, shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, we have a little racism.
We have racism. There are some races, some in our world that just don't get along with others.
They don't. Some races do, other races don't. I mean, immediately, orcs are a player race
in our world.
that
yes,
we have in our world, and they live above ground, and they're not evil.
No.
And they tend to get along with the Empire of Swords, which doesn't get along with many people. The Empire of Swords is run by a particular subspecies of elves, and they dislike
pretty much everybody.
Right? They distrust. They're very xenophobic, but they tend to get along with the orcs. They tend to get along with the giants that live to the north. The Kerovarans are dwarves. They don't like the Faranasi from the Empire of Swords, but they sometimes get along with the Prenegenes, which are humans, but they don't really like them or trust them either.
Yeah, I think the trust thing, it's not to say they dislike them, they distrust them.
There are stereotypes that are held by certain nations and peoples in the world that are not parallel to anything in the real world. But they're there because of, for the same reason there's stereotypes everywhere, right?
Absolutely.
Lack of knowledge, lack of education, lack of interaction.
And misinformation.
And misinformation.
And I think that stereotype is probably the underlying issue with racism.
Yeah.
All right. You see one person of that race and you just assume because of the stories you've heard, they're all like that.
Right.
And I think that's where racism stems from, is stereotypes. There are a number of the adventures more oftenly than not do not fit into that stereotype. That's why they're adventures. They don't get along with everyone else because they're not like everyone else. If our Karavaran doesn't get along with all the other Karavarans, because he's probably not acting like a Karavaran. So he's all right. I don't get along with people. I'm going to go see if I can find someone who does I do get along. And they go out and they adventure. So now the world sees this Karavaran. They hear about him, and now they're being racist against this one Karavaran, and vice versa, because the Karavaran has been heard nothing about the Valinesi elves, and well, that's the way they all are, and they're not, because that's the stereotype, and that was the basis of most racism is the stereotypes.
Yeah, and it makes for good storytelling at the gaming table. I remember having a character that Lou's character didn't like because of. Well, it was like racial tensions. There was a lack of trust, big cultural differences, and they became fast friends. I think the most diverse group you'll ever run across is probably an adventuring party.
Very much so. Like I said, because a lot of times that particular individual is stepping away from the stereotype of the rest of his people or her people. So, yeah, racism is something that is addressed a lot, but not necessarily as I hate you because you're an elf. There's not a lot of that. It's like, I don't understand you because you're an elf, and your ways are so different than mine that I don't know if I can truly accept you. And then as time goes on, you realize, all right, maybe the points of view are slightly different, but everyone's opinion of food is usually good. Now, you're eating that food because that's what you grew up on. I'm not going to touch that because that's elven food. Okay, I'm hungry, so I'm going to eat food. And all right, maybe this stuff isn't so bad after all. And yeah, that's very, very simplified, but in most cases, it's like that.
It is exactly like that. At least I remember a scenario that we had where the cultural difference with food ended up being kind of bad because one...
Mortal?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, make sure you get Lou's food preferences before you invite him to dinner.
And how we handled this stuff was there were no racial slurs.
Correct.
Which even if they're made up, I just find it distasteful. I don't know why, but it's just it's just nasty. So we left any real or fabricated racial slurs out of it.
And to our table's credit, no one invented anything.
Right.
I think there was one instance where someone tried to get something started, and I think in character, someone else goes, "Is that really necessary?" And kind of called them out on it right there on the spot, and it was immediately quelled. But I think it was that one and only time, and then from that point on, and we're talking, that was probably maybe year 4 or 5. I'm thinking out of the 12, and it hasn't happened since. And still to this day, and even on our other tables, things like that don't happen.
Right, and I think it's. When you get into things like the violence that often accompanies racism and the words, when you eliminate those two things, you can handle the topic.
Yeah, because then it just becomes distrust. Yeah. Not necessarily all hate, dislike at the strongest. I simply don't like them. I'm not going to travel with him. Why? You can't trust those people. Yeah. I think that was probably the worst thing that anyone said. You can't trust those people. And then, like I said, we do game long-term scenarios, years. But by the end of those years, now the distrust is gone, and it's the camaraderie has been built amongst the races. And we were an extremely diversified group. And that whole racism that went away, but then the group was being stereotyped, or the individuals by the group, the different nations that they were encountering after that. So it didn't go away. It just went away in the dynamic of the group. But now you have an entire group supporting one another as they went in. And it's like, well, that person can't come through the gates. They're going to have to stay in the jail until we can prove that they're not, as bad as all the others. And the group stands in front and goes, no, I don't think so.
Yeah, we have one race in particular that nobody in the world seems to like because they're something of a nuisance race.
Yes.
And on purpose.
Yes, they're playful and childlike, and it's like, well, they're innocent until you get to know them, and you realize that they're, if you shaved a bunch of the fuzzy little gremlins and mixed just a little bit of the scaly little gremlin, put them in a cute outfit and set them loose, Yeah, that's what you're contending with.
But I think with them, it's even more distrust.
It is
Yes.
mostly distrust.
Yes.
And lack of understanding.
Exactly. Yep.
You know who's a huge racist and it's really disappointing, and I just realized this not long ago.
Do tell.
Dr. McCoy. I rewatched all the
Dr.
Star
Yeah,
Trek.
huge
race,
Huge.
You green-blooded inhuman. I'm like, bones. This does not hold up well in 2021.
Yeah, he was a huge racist.
Yeah, big disappointment. But again, him and Spock became fast friends.
Yep.
So I don't know if that meant he could get away with what he said. But
Or maybe the whole, remember,
Yeah.
just before he went into the dilithium chamber,
that's-
was a way to nullify the previous several decades of racism.
But then again, Vulcans have no feelings,
they have feelings, they just don't show them.
which means they don't have any feelings.
That is not true. That is not
Anyways,
true.
let's move away from Star Trek.
I studied
Let's-
the Kolinar on Vulcan. And,
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, well, I can't wait for the 1 month pond far where we could have a little peace and quiet.
Neither can I.
Or in his case, palm far.
Ouch.
Luke can cut that for you. All right, so
He won't.
then we move on to the next one.
Yeah, violence. I gotta say, I love a good violent D&D game. I like my D&D games kind of like every Conan story ever written. Just a savage amount of violence in there. I want some good fights.
There's a difference between violence and combativeness. There's combative. Violence, I in my opinion, violence is forcing yourself or your beliefs in a physical form more often, or something that's harmful and detrimental to somebody else, whether they want it or not.
Yeah, I mean, that sums up our table nicely.
Yes. If you can't defend yourself, it's not a combat. It's violence. It is someone, oppressing another person in a harmful physical fashion or a severely mental fashion that does them, permanent, sometimes irreparable harm. And, where as opposed to being combative.
Yeah, our players are both.
Yeah.
Your stuff isn't safe around our players.
You got to remember, our groups, we do use a lot of these as subplots, underlying tones to kind of build the drama. So when you open that door, you have to expect your players to walk through it. And they will use this, as every player should, to their advantage. So they're either going to embrace it in a way to blend in with the other people and, temporarily, hopefully, and get to a point where they need to do what they need to do and then back out again, or like Conan, throws on in the robe and holds up the two-headed, idol with the sun and the moon above, with two serpents facing one another to get into the, into closer to kill who he needs to kill.
Yeah, to hack off James Earl Jones' head and throw him down the steps.
It'd be horrible because he wouldn't be able to do the lifetime of voiceovers.
Yeah, like the Arby's commercials.
But sometimes they, not sometimes, our players always will pick up the mantle, even if it's just for a short while.
Yeah.
And use some of this, not use it against you, but use it to an advantage of theirs. So if you're going to present this, expect them to use it back on you, including violence.
Yeah, and we, when I run the table, I be violent, and that's just how I handle it. And the players, I don't handle it delicately, because, our group in particular, I think they know boundaries pretty well.
They've been established over the, I said our week-long getaway is a dozen years old, but we gamed for several years before that with a large a number of this group
Yeah.
before we consolidated them. It was like maybe 2-3 little small groups that several of us floated between, and they floated between the other groups. And so we all knew each other for the most part. And we, under our banner at the time where we had our own gaming group, we can kind of consolidated it. It became the big thing that it did. So you probably say good of 20 years for the majority of these people,
Yeah.
if not longer for some of others. So yeah, the boundaries were pretty much already set by both you and I as we both game mastered over the last several decades.
I like that Wizards of the Coast put out an adventure that doesn't require any sort of combat. I think that's good. I think being able to handle some situations socially as opposed to with violence or combat or whatever have you is good. But I like a good old fashioned melee.
That's the old school in us. That's the old school in us. Yep. Just get up there and just beat the shit out of something.
Yeah, it's some of my favorite parts of the Lord of the Rings, both the book and the movie, were the big battles. Helm's Deep, or even when Boromir fell, which
that was probably one of the best. It was small personal, but that was an epic battle.
It was glorious, and men the world over wept as he fell to his knees, pierced with arrows. But he fought the fight like a big old badass. That's cool. I mean, talking your way through stuff. That's cool. I mean, if you're a Picard fan. But if you're a Kirk fan and Corrick, if you happen to be a Janeway fan, right? Whooping a little bit of ass is way cooler to watch than
Lou.
Than
6 minutes, 6 minutes and 22 seconds since the last Star Trek reference.
Yep.
I told you it's gonna be one of those episodes.
So yeah, embrace the violence.
Yeah,
right. Embrace it.
Well, yeah,
it's your game.
Yes, yeah. Violence is probably. Out of all of these is probably the lesser of the group.
Yeah.
Because it's the easiest to manage.
Well,
without really offending people.
Number one, the game is really built on violence. If
It
that
is.
wasn't the case, you wouldn't have any swords or magic.
Right.
Well, there you go. You wouldn't need weapons.
Right.
You wouldn't need weapons. What are you going to do? I'm casting rainbow.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to counter with butterfly cloud.
Yeah.
Now
we're My
Little Pony episode.
Pretty Pony and Care Bears.
There's a difference between violence and torture.
Yes.
Yes.
And I
even
think
though torture is violent. There's
there's a distinction there, and I think maybe kind of violence parentheses torture, where you stay away from the torture. There's really no need for that. You can suggest it and fade to black.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds in the other room, screams, things like that, where you can pretty safely assume what's going on, but you don't need to go into detail and describe torture.
No,
I think that type of violence is unnecessary.
Absolutely,
it is unnecessary. There is a lot of violence that, like you said, you're going to have to include.
Yeah,
there is going to be the monster that just picks up a party member and tears him in half.
Yeah, and that's cool.
And starts gnawing on the innards like he's popping open a Rolo bar. The stringy ones with the caramel inside. Oh, gee, I love those.
They're good. Yeah.
Well, guess what? Now the party's going to go violent on that creature.
Yeah.
There's a certain amount of violence that this game, like Lou said, is inherent and it needs to be embraced.
Well, that's why there's no hug spell.
There's no hug spell. Yes. Well, you can use command. Oh, look, a piercer. Go hug him.
And that's a different type of hot topic when you're using command for that sort of physical contact.
There you go. It has been done, I'm sure. So let's move on to the next one, shall we? Religious persecution.
Oh, that is fodder for a good story. Religious persecution, right? We've been doing this since we discovered religion, and we're still doing it today.
And will for a very long time.
Yes, forever and ever and ever. And we've talked about a lot of these as like, don't include these in your game. And here we are being hypocrites because we do.
Because we do. Because we are fortunate where we have a group that understands that, and we will tell them, I don't think. Well, we're at the point now where we don't have to tell them at session 0 this is what's going to happen. They will see it coming,
know.
but they know it's stuff like this because we do use these, but they know how to go about it without being, again, the racial slurs, which is huge. Where this become religious slurs.
Yeah.
Derogatory parallels, stuff like it. We don't use those. We don't. It just they're obviously being persecuted because of their religion.
Yeah, and the political climate to the north is one of religious persecution.
Oh, in our world, yes, very much so.
You know, the empire that lives to the north is trying to expand and push their religion on the giants and the bordermen. And there's constant resistance and pushback on their behalf.
Well, there's a fair amount of this, and I think you said it perfectly. Religious persecution often goes hand in hand with the demographic of the ruling governments.
Right.
You know, one usually it would like our kingdom up in the north. Very much so. It is a theocracy.
Yes.
And that's pretty much the same. You know, the government is the religion, and vice versa. There's, to a lesser degree, in the seeds of the world, in our world, it's more governmental than religious, but they're still somewhat hand in hand because every one of those little island nations has its own basic type of religion. They're similar, but not exact. So it's more the governmental than the religious, where it becomes undertone, where it's the other way around in the kingdom up north.
Yes, and that's the backdrop for adventures in that area. You know, that's how it's used, and you may encounter excursions from the Kingdom of Light up there into the deeper north.
Right.
And usually they've started much in the same way that religious persecution had in parts of Europe, where missionaries were sent. No, thank you, we're not interested. And then, you know, military.
Yes, right behind going, yes, you are interested.
Yeah.
And we're going to help you realize that.
And it's not, there's no parallels. I think this is where it is manageable. There's no parallels with any like real world religions.
Well, when we built the world, we purposely went out of our way to make sure there was no direct parallels. We would, even when we built the races, when we built the religions, when we built the governmental bases and we would take 2, 3, sometimes 4 that were similar and blend them together, or even a couple that were dissimilar and blended them together and said this would work well because of the geographical location of where they are in the world, the type defenses they have, their neighbors. We took all this into consideration when we slowly built, and as we were building, it evolved as well. So even from our beginning point, where it ended up was usually fairly different than where we started, because it matured as we built it, and as new influences were introduced. All right, well, if this culture down here, their religion's this, how would that influence the ones to the north or the south, east, west? And then we indoctrinated that dynamic into the religion of that one nation as well. And when we got done, that's where we ended up. And the secluded corner of the north, where the Holy Kingdom of Light was, that was a perfect spot for this type, theocracy to build, because it had all the dynamics and their neighbors who pretty much left them alone so they could build. And so the military was very easily able to spread until they started to get towards the heart of the other nations, where they were pushed back. And the pushback is where it really said, oh, no, wait. No, you have to understand, look how big we are. We must be right because we're so large. And their borders got pushed back, and that condensed that ideal.
Yeah, and I think what made it work in all the instances in our homebrew world was, it was obvious we weren't making a statement for or against any real world religions.
Absolutely.
So, there wasn't going to be, and purposefully so, because the object is not to give offense to anyone.
Yeah, you won't find Nazis anywhere in our world.
No.
You just simply won't. People may try to find parallels, and there are some parts that may see, oh, okay, yep, that looks just like that. Yes, that one little segment does. That one little segment, because it's easy to make parallels when you're dealing with religious persecution. There is a lot of it that's been going on for a long time. And no matter what part of our world you look at, that little part of religious persecution, you're going to find a parallel for that moment or that little segment, but not for the overall sweeping ideals of our world. So, and that's how we dealt with the religious persecution. And in no way, I mean, we have never have, and I know we never will push to the level of like genocide.
No.
You know, or something in that grand of a scale. It becomes, instead of a dislike or a distrust from one person to another, it's one nation to another.
Yeah. And it's just a topic that is...
Again, it's more of an underlying topic as opposed to the forefront, the primary plot. And that's how you go about handling that a little bit on the more delicate side.
Let's talk about evil, because evil is alive and well in our campaign world. There's good and there's evil.
Yes, there is.
And I firmly stand by evil being okay in your fantasy world. And there's some beings that you're going to meet that are they're all evil. There's no nice ones.
And they're not going to be player characters.
Right. They're not. It's
monsters,
fantasy.
monsters and NPCs, because there has to be an opponent. There has to be a dichotomy.
There does. You won't be able to recognize good without evil.
Exactly.
And some beings just are. And that's the way it is for our world. If it's not a thing you like or embrace or see a need for, certainly don't include it in yours. We're not telling you you're wrong, but in ours, there are some beings that are they're evil.
They're evil through and through, and that is their purpose.
Yeah, by design.
By design, that is their purpose. That, are they out to burn the world? Absolutely, and if it burns them with it, great. Yeah, that's the goal.
We have an entity that is responsible for the majority of the monsters being created in the world.
One
and
individual,
they're all evil.
Yeah, one individual, and she is the epitome thereof.
And it works.
Yep. And don't get us wrong, we don't have just good and evil. There's 144 shades of gray in between.
Yeah,
and we touch on them all.
And it's not really, none of our races of people are strictly evil, right? So
yes,
our orcs are not evil. They're neither good nor they're evil. They're individuals who are aligned however that particular individual is. And
they run the spectrum just like every other society and every other individual in any other society. There are some that are out for the betterment of the people. There's some of them out for the betterment of themselves. And there's some that just don't give a crap about anybody, and there's some that love everybody. It runs the full gamut. Aside from the shell on the outside, you change the shell and call it human, and everyone's okay with it. You throw an orc there, and everyone's, well, a lot of your older gamers will look at an orc going, well, they're obviously evil. They're an orc.
Yeah.
And that's not true. Not in our world.
No, not in our world.
They're just by our standards, a less than attractive person.
Yeah, I don't know. Some orc women, though,
Well,
it's like
Klingon
women.
Yeah, there you go. Well, hey, the tusks give you something to hang on to, I guess.
It's the cranial ridges.
That's it.
It's all about the cranial ridges. So include evil in your world. It's good, right? There's good very seldom triumphs over evil in the real world, right? The good guys never win. They don't have the resources.
No, not anymore. No.
So in your fantasy world, embrace the evil so your good guys can triumph over that.
And that's kind of the hallmark of ever since from the very beginning, when you're playing characters, more often than not, you're playing a good guy, or at least a shade of good.
Yeah.
Trying to overcome something or someone. And you can't do that unless there's something to overcome.
And it makes it easy to include evil if you don't represent any real world individuals.
Yeah, stay away from
your evil beings or whatever have you. keep a distance between that and your evil, and it won't offend.
With one exception.
With one exception.
Con!
He was misunderstood.
It goes without saying that some people can and will be offended by one or several of these subjects. It is not our intention to make light of any of these subjects, but during history, all of these have occurred and are still a problem society needs to address to this day. To ignore that these issues go on is, in my opinion, embracing ignorance. If and when tackling these issues, and without glorifying them, remember that the battle between good and evil needs both sides. And in our world, though it may sometimes take a while, good always triumphs over the world's atrocities.
And that's 5 hot topics that are alive and well in our homebrew campaign world. We'll see you next time in the dojo. That's going to conclude this episode. Thanks for tuning in and listening. Please subscribe to the podcast for more great content. If you'd like to hear a particular topic, you can reach us on Facebook at the Dungeon Masters Dojo, or you can drop us an email at thedungeonmastersdojo@gmail.com. Thank you, and have a good day.